Welcome back to WatchBox Studios, and today I have a special guest, Michael Culyba, who is the director of Keeper of Time, which is an amazing new documentary film about watchmaking. It's about to be released. By the time you're watching it, it'll already be out. And in my opinion, probably one of the best documentaries concerning watches. Maybe my top 5 documentaries I've ever seen, but definitely the top one on watches I've ever seen. Thank you so much for coming, Michael.
Well, that's thank you for saying that. It's really means a lot to me, and thanks for having me on, Sequan.
Yeah, not a problem. I do mean it. I flew all the way from Dubai just to have this interview.
I mean,
listen, I watched it and I was like, first you think documentary about watches, so I'm expecting interviews sat together just with watchmakers, and you got a great cast. I'm talking we have Philippe Dufour, we have FP Journe, we have Max Büsser, you have Roger Smith, and all great, nice, intimate conversations. And I think you did it in a way anybody could digest, not just the hardcore watch enthusiast, but somebody who just has an hour and a half and wants to see something very interesting, and you might get a little bit of a, watch bug after it. You might get a bite. Tell me, let's go back to the beginning. Let's get a little brief introduction to yourself and the world of filmmaking.
Yeah, so I am a professional documentary editor by trade.
All right.
And I've been doing that for about 20 years now in New York City.
Awesome.
The whole time I've been doing that, I've always wanted to make my own feature documentary film, and I just could not find the subject matter that I was passionate enough to put in the time, money, and energy that it takes to make a film like this. And about 4.5 years ago, I bought myself a nice watch, and I didn't know what that meant. So your first nice watch ever? First nice watch. I've always worn a watch, and of course the first thing that comes to mind is Rolex. Yeah. And so I started looking at watches. I ended up getting a Tudor, by the way, but yeah, I didn't realize, honestly, there was a difference between a mechanical watch and a quartz battery-powered watch. Gary Steingart's in the film, the writer and watch enthusiast, and he had a similar experience. He just assumed everything ran on batteries, and that's where I was 4.5 years ago. And but when I learned that most nice watches are mechanical in nature, and what that was, I just immediately became fascinated by these little micro-engineered time-telling machines, and just went down the rabbit hole of horology. Like I think most, it's a disease, it's a virus, right? And I caught it, and I just at that point realized I've got my subject matter. This is the film.
It spoke to you.
This is the film I need to make, and so set out making it.
Really quickly, what made you choose the Tudor? Because we will have Tudors on. We should do a little research.
It was interesting. I was so green. So it was like, at first I was like, what? Why is, Rolex has the Submariner, and then there's this company, Tudor also has a Submariner, how are they getting away with that? That must be copyrighted, you know what I mean? But then after doing some research, I was like, oh, it's the sister brand of Rolex. Yep. And it was originally, the brand was made to have a more affordable option, but the same, quality as a Rolex. And something about that ethos spoke to me. I could have gotten a Rolex, but there was just something about that brand, Tudor, and that it was a Rolex, and but not, that spoke to me. And so that's what I decided to.
Tell people a little bit about the watch you have on today, because I think that's a very interesting Tudor.
Yeah, this is a vintage Tudor oyster prince date. This is, I think, from the early 80s, but it's most of these were in a 34 millimeter case, and this is what they call the jumbo.
Yes. So you got your Tudor, you got bit by the watch bug, and I always think that horology it's like a library you're walking down, right? And then you walk past this book, and it's a watch, and you open this book, and you realize that this book is just the first in a whole encyclopedia set of how deep you can go down the watchmaking rabbit hole.
That's right.
So to take us back to, you decide you want to do a film about watchmaking. How do you start? Do you have any relationships with anybody, or where's ground zero for you in the journey? I knew nobody.
Wow. But in New York City, there's the Horological Society of New York.
Yes.
And so because I was interested in watches, they offer watchmaking classes to the public. and they instruct you how to. They're fantastic, by the way. I highly recommend it.
I've heard nothing but good things.
And they instruct you how to take apart a watch movement, put it back together. There's like 4 levels of. I took all the courses.
Nice.
And Nick Manousis, who's now the executive director of the Horological Society of New York, I was like, well, he would be a great person to interview for the film. And so contacted him, and he was more than willing to participate. But he really became, and he's in the film.
Yes.
He really became the sort of cornerstone for me, to connecting me to all the other people, a lot of the other people that are in the film. So, for instance, the first big name was Francois-Paul Journe. And so Nick approached Francois-Paul, and lo and behold, he was interested in participating in the film.
Wow.
Happened to be in New York, and we did the first interview with him in New York. And then once he was on, and by the way, I was so green. I'm not sure at that. Listen, I went from not knowing the difference between a quartz watch and a mechanical watch to interviewing Francois-Paul Journe within like 7 months.
Oh man!
So it was like,
I was going to ask, did you feel starstruck? But it didn't sink in, that it's.
It was. I think I was starstruck because I did my research. I knew who he was. I really admired his watches and Francois Paul himself.
Yeah.
I just think, even at the time, I knew he was an innovator with like the resonance watch,
Yes.
which is like one of like the holy grails for me. I just think that's an amazing timepiece. But yeah, I did my research, and I got through the interview just fine, and
it was good.
From there, it just snowballed from there, really.
Yeah, it's crazy. So that was after Nick, FP was your first interview for the.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Wow.
And then I interviewed. I can't remember, but William Messina, collector,
Yes.
who he's also came on as an executive producer on the film.
Awesome.
Who is the founder of Messina Lab.
Exactly.
Interviewed him as a collector. I think he was right before Journe or right after Journe. I can't remember. But what has happened was those first interviews in New York, I did on my own dime. And then I quickly realized, if I'm going to do a feature-length film, I got to go to Switzerland.
Yeah.
I got to go to Geneva. And so I needed money to do that, and did a Kickstarter.
Okay.
It took me all summer to plan for it. And
Really?
Oh yeah, I had to hire a graphic designer, and I had to hire a consultant who had done it before, a publicist.
Yeah.
It was
a full-fledged machine.
Yeah, if you're gonna, I was trying to raise $100,000, and when you're at that kind of level, you really, it's.
It has to look real,
It's an operation,
yes.
yeah, and at that time, I reached out to Max Büsser as well, and he was supportive at that time.
Wow.
Listen, all of them were supportive. They donated signed books, all kinds of stuff as rewards, and it was very successful. I ended up grossing close to $116,000.
Oh, nice. There you go.
Which paid for all the filming and all the travel to go to Switzerland. Went to Geneva a number of times. Went to Prague to film the astronomical clock there.
Yeah, that was beautiful.
Ultimately went to the Isle of Man to film Roger Smith, and Seattle to film Brittany Nicole Cox, who's in the film. She's a wonderful antiquarian horologist.
And her section to me is so amazing, because we rarely see those older automatons and these huge machines. And I don't want to blow anything, but there's a scene with a swan.
Yeah.
That is so amazing, that when you see them activate that swan, and it's so lifelike, you're just like, how do you make that work?
That's the thing, and to think that swan, which is a 1-to-1 scale swan, essentially,
that's huge,
made out of silver, that has, I think she said, 100 and some rings in the neck, where it's able to articulate and preen its neck to pick up a fish
perfectly. Doesn't look mechanical at all.
No. And the thing is, to think that was made in the mid 1700s, no
Insane.
Electricity, nothing.
Insane.
This is the rabbit hole you go down. Where you're like, how did they do this? But yeah, it was in that swan was what influenced Brittany to get into horology. and she restores these antique automatons, which are just these, like you said, just these amazing, wondrous machines.
Exactly. It's like you can't comprehend when you see the Swan, and there's a few other ones that you show in there. It's just like, how is this happening in the 1700s? Come on,
right,
it's like there's a time travel going on. Is it something that we don't know about? And what I really love about the film is you show so many aspects of it. So you have the automatons, and you go back to big town center clocks and how those work, and then we start with the sundial and how complex sundials got. Because when you think sundial in your head, okay, they're just telling the hours, blah blah blah. But when you go to the really complex ones that tell you, the constellations and everything, and I never really thought about it until I saw that.
Yeah, I was, I wanted, of course, the film. One of the threads is the history of timekeeping, essentially from the dawn of mankind, with standing stone circles like Stonehenge and that type of thing. But of course, the sundial is one of the most famous sort of ancient timekeepers, and had discovered William Andrews, who's a horologist and sundial maker. But like you said, his sundials aren't just reading the time.
No.
They're called longitude dials, and so they're made for a specific latitude and longitude on the planet. And what happens is you can make, there's the gnomon, which is what casts the shadow on the dial, but he has a bead on there. So on a specific date and time, and there's a map of the world, by the way, on the dial, and at a certain day, the shadow will fall on a line across the map to commemorate a specific day and time. In this instance, he had made one for the Pomfret School in Connecticut, and so that specific graduation day every year, that bead over the course of the shadow of that bead over the course of the day will travel across that line, and it of course shows you the time of day, but also that line across the map gives you noon everywhere across the world where it falls.
Exactly.
And then underneath the dial,
wait, there's more.
There's all kinds of other, like the beam of light comes through there and gives you the zodiac sign and the season and all this stuff. They're really complicated pieces of horological, I don't know, machinery is the wrong word, but again, it doesn't take a battery,
Yeah, no, and that's what, like, when you see it working, because he's explaining it, and then you have the time lapse going, so you're seeing the shadows and everything going, and like in your head, you're just like, how, and to think of something so beautiful, it's like a nice sculpture, but then it's so functional.
Yeah,
and like it makes you want to go to Connecticut just to use it, just
to
see it. And
as he says in the film, it's a nice little monument to contemplate life, contemplate time, and there's something really nice about that, and it showing you how the Earth is, the Earth and our solar system, that is the original timekeepers. This is everything is based on.
Exactly.
And so an object like this, you can see essentially the Earth turning.
Exactly. You see everything going on just with one little sculpture.
We got very lucky with that day, by the way.
Because, really?
Because I go up to there, you have fingers crossed there's sun.
Yes, exactly. Right.
So it turned out it was perfect.
Day.
Got horribly sunburned, by the way. But we were there all day.
That's what you do for the movie.
Yeah, exactly. That's the sacrifice you make.
Who would you say was the hardest interview to land or to get to, or logistically? It seems like the relationships kind of popped up and made it work.
I think I got really lucky getting Philippe Dufour.
Yes.
I find him to be quite elusive.
Yeah. He is.
And so what happened when I did the Kickstarter, beyond just raising the money to film, it exposed the film to other people in the watch world. And one of those was John Reardon, and the other one was Eric Koo. And Eric Koo ended up being the one to introduce me to Philippe Dufour, awesome. And so, and he again was game to participate.
Yeah.
And by the time, just a really special day, because by the time we filmed Philippe Dufour in the Vallée de Joux, I had become way more knowledgeable about watches and the craft, and I knew who he was, and I knew I was going to be in the
see the Godfather.
Yes, in the presence of a living legend. And again, he was so welcoming and forthcoming, and just was really enthusiastic about,
You could tell.
telling his story and showing us around his workshop, and volunteered to sit at the bench and
Really?
and polish it, like you see in the film.
Yes.
Polish the screw sink in the bridge with the bow and a piece of ebony wood.
Like seeing him go.
Yeah, and then he polished some beveling, or he did some beveling and polished it on a bridge plate. And explains how he does it, and it was just really just one of the most special days of filming, for sure. I will never forget it, and I think it really is a testament, seeing this in the film, of just how dedicated and the attention to detail to this artisanal craft that it is. Like in his case, and all these other watchmakers in the film, this is really a hand-made,
from A to Z,
A to
everything.
Z, scratch.
When he polishes the bevel, he's using like a piece of a tree that he gets in the mountains when it's warm out.
Mm-hmm.
And when you hear stories of him and some other watchmakers and what they do, but what I like, his was very inspirational. All of them were inspirational, right? Because you have Roger Smith, who knocked down the door of George Daniels and did 10 years of making his own watch.
That story blew me away.
Oh no! Like when you watch that story, is like dedication, right? And knowing that there's something inside that needs to get out through your fingers, and like somebody could tell you no, and you just come back, just like, I tried.
Yeah, the story of Roger Smith, like, I knew who Roger Smith was. I knew he was a disciple of George Daniels. I knew George Daniels, and it was important for me to film Roger because there's that lineage.
Yes.
And of course, Roger is, a full-fledged, incredible watchmaker in his own merit. But yeah, I wasn't, honestly, again, being slightly green, I wasn't familiar with sort of his backstory.
Yeah.
And so when I interviewed him, and he told me, that he met George Daniels, he held the Space Traveler pocket watch, and he decided right there that he's going to be a watchmaker. And then asked for an apprenticeship for George Daniels. And George Daniels says, well, if you want to be a watchmaker, go and make a watch.
Exactly.
And he goes back to his parents' house where he's living, and spends a year making a watch from scratch.
It's crazy.
Goes back to George Daniels, shows him the watch, and George Daniels says, this is complete trash. This is garbage, It's like it barely works. But to your point, Roger didn't put his tail between his legs and quit and say, I'm never going to be able to do this. He instead goes back to make another watch. This time, he spends 5 years making a watch. And not only making the watch, making it 4 times over, because what he realizes is that the parts that he made the year before are less good than the parts he just made. So he made the watch 4 times. Then goes back to the Isle of Man to see George Daniels and to get his approval.
Yeah.
And finally, George Daniels says, of course, congratulations, you're a watchmaker.
Yeah.
Then he gets an apprenticeship, which lasts 3.5 years. So you're talking about 10 years of just learning before he was able and confident enough to go on his own to make his own watches. I mean, who does that?
Nobody. Like he said in the documentaries, like it's hard to find just kind of crazy people who are willing to take that much time and dedicate so much. And it really explains, like, people ask, some of the dollar amounts of watches we sell can go insane, right?
Yeah.
But when you see a Roger Smith being so delicate and just so dedicated to perfection, you understand what you're getting, right? You're getting that 10 years of dedication and honing their skills. And like he said in his film, like his watches aren't like super crazy on the movements. It's just really, really well done. He gives you a nice style. His hands are blued, almost a purple hue. So there's just these, and him just wanted to push forward the British watchmaking scene, but just keeping it very traditional in the themes. And I don't know, when you see things like that, and then you hear F.V. Journe's story as well, but it inspires you, right? No matter what you're doing, it just says like, man, just dedicate just have some dedication. Maybe in 10 years, you might.
Yeah,
might
no,
I
that's what attracted me to all of these watchmakers and what they do, because they have that dedication and tenacity, and that's why I wanted to focus on independent watchmakers, because they're doing it on their own. I'm an independent filmmaker, and so doing anything independently making, it's hard. It requires that dedication, that tenacity, that don't give up attitude.
Exactly.
And so, when I was facing any sort of hurdle making this film, which again took 4 years, I could really relate in a way to Roger Smith's story. Just keep going. He was a huge inspiration to me making this film going forward. Certainly, if he can spend 10 years learning the craft of fine watchmaking, and certainly I can get over a few months of a little hardship making the film or whatnot.
What would you say was your biggest challenge in making the film?
I think the biggest challenge really was in the editing room. I really wanted to make a film. Again, I started with the watches, but when you look down, for me at least, after having a watch, and you look down at your wrist, and the next question is, what is it measuring?
Yes.
What is time? And so at that point, I had the idea that I could fold in this more philosophical theme and ideas.
Yes.
And you kind of unify the film with that. But in the editing room, it was extremely challenging to make. There's the profiles of the watchmakers and the horologists, and then we have a story thread of the history of timekeeping, and then folding in these more philosophical themes about time and how we experience it into that, and weaving those things in and out together and trying to make it seem seamless to an audience. I mean, it's incredibly challenging. And so, and also it's like, again, I was like, and still am focused on the technical side of things. Like, wow, it's amazing. How does a tourbillon, like an amazing device, and all these things. And my wife, who's also a film editor, by the way, knows nothing about watches, could care, give two licks about a watch. But so she was very helpful because she was coming at it from a layperson's point of view. So when I'm like, oh, okay, we have a 10-minute section here on how a tourbillon works. She's like, it's too much. Maybe that's a DVD extra.
Yes.
So that was challenging too, knowing how much technical information to put in the film, what was necessary, and when to pull back with that too,
So Michael, by the time this airs, the film would have already been premiered. What are some of your expectations for the film to do? And then tell people how they can watch it at home.
Well, the film is now available on Vimeo on demand.
Nice.
The best way, probably the easiest way to access that is just going to the film's webpage, keeperoftimemovie.com. There'll be a link there. It'll send you directly to Vimeo, where you can purchase the film for $15 and watch.
Steal.
I'm hoping to put some extras on there too, so that
awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
I can't explain how broad appealing I think it is. I think if you're somebody who enjoys a good documentary, if you know a little bit about watchmaking, just want to see true passionate watchmakers, but also go through just so many concepts and themes that I think you wove really well in the whole documentary. I was really expecting something that was a little bit on the technical side. When you look back, there's not too many watch documentaries that's out there.
It's true.
I think there's one about George Daniels, and there's of course interview slices, long form, short form.
Sure, of course, yeah.
But the way you did it, where you have these great interviews, but you take us from sundial all the way up, you go to the automatons, all the philosophy that's in there as well. It's how we as humans perceive time from babies until we're older, and what's going on in our brains. There's just so much. There's a lot of education in there, but it's very entertaining, and it's very moving as well. Because when you listen to Philippe Dufour, and he has two quotes that I really love. One is when he makes 5 minute repeaters for this brand and they don't treat him as well. He's like, I'm never doing that again. I'd rather put on an orange suit and pick up trash. And then, and then at the end of his clip, he's like, the thing about emotion, you can't tell it, you have to feel it. Mm-hmm. And that's the thing you can't explain with some watches. Like some watches you pick up and like, for whatever reason, you just feel it.
Yeah.
It just kind of strums your heartstrings. You're like, I want this watch with me.
Right.
I don't know why, maybe it's this or that. It's like, it makes you want to go out and do something,
Yeah.
I've been in Dubai and I've been talking to a lot of smaller independent watchmakers. And I think this is a film where you show these to certain people and this will create some watchmakers of the future for sure.
Yeah, I mean, that is the ultimate takeaway that I want people to come away from watching the film. Not necessarily become a watchmaker, but I think, listen, I think it can be trite, sound trite at least. It's, we have finite lives. We're only on this planet for who knows how long.
Yeah, it's a blink, right?
Yeah, right. And it's important, ultimately, to live our lives in an interesting way, try to create beautiful things, and I think share it with the world. And I think that's where our lives can gain real meaning. And I think all of the watchmakers in this film are doing that, And not only that, I think everybody in the film is doing that, whether they're a theoretical physicist or a writer. And so that's what I want people, after people watch the film, I really like them to ask themselves, am I living the life that I've dreamt for myself?
Yeah.
And if I'm not, it's time.
Yeah.
It's time, and it's never too late. But yeah, that's what I want people to come away with.
No, I think you definitely will achieve that, because after watching that, I almost just went to watchmaking school. Right?
Yeah,
there's one in Seattle, so I was like,
yeah, sign up. Yeah, for sure.
Maybe one day. Well, Michael, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for making this film, because it's really something I feel was well needed in the watch space. Nothing else like it, and I think you're gonna have a lot of success.
Well, thanks for having me on. This was really fun.
All right, and make sure you go to Vimeo or just keeperoftime.com.
Keeperoftime.movie.com. Yeah, and all the link will be there to watch the film.
Exactly. Click it. It's worth it. You won't regret it. That's for sure. Michael, thank you so much.
Great. Thanks so much.